Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and today I thought we would take a look at the True Heart Intuitive Tarot, and I wanted to share a little bit about my experiences working with the deck and how I've been incorporating it into my personal tarot practice. One of the things that I have to say about this deck before we jump in is that it's not really my thing. And I'll talk about that more when we get into actually looking at the cards. But the thing that really drew me to this deck was actually the guidebook, because I have watched quite a few videos on this deck before I purchased it for like the last, I don't know, couple months to a year, however long it's been since this deck came out. And I keep hearing the same thing repeated over and over again, that the strength of the deck really lies in the guidebook. And I do have to say that I kind of agree. So I bought this deck because I wanted to read the guidebook. I actually had zero intention of working with the cards when I purchased this deck. Let's talk about the guidebook first, because I think that's really where this deck shines and where the beauty lies in this particular deck. Now, I do want to say, like right off the bat, if you are a beginner to tarot, I think this is an excellent beginner's deck. It is mass market, it's inexpensive, it's readily available, and it does hold fairly close to the Rider-Waite-Smith structure that we often see in beginner decks, and that most of actually the majority of tarot decks and the majority of books on how to read tarot actually focus on. But the thing that this deck also does is it kind of goes its own way in a few places, where it's really talking about the elemental and the numerological association of the cards, which I absolutely love. So this is the True Heart Intuitive Tarot by Rachel True, and I'm sure, as you've probably heard, Rachel True was also is best known for her role in The Craft, which was a movie that I binged watched in my younger years, because I was like at that age, right? Anyway, there's kind of that like little bit of nostalgia for me there. This is a beautiful, beautiful book. Within it, we have the introduction, getting started, digging into the deck, tarot spreads, the major or minor arcana. Now, again, if you are new to tarot, I think this is a wonderful, wonderful beginner's deck. And in the introduction, one of the things that this deck does really well, or this book does really well, is to create connections between the author's real life and the tarot. So when you're first coming to tarot and you're like looking at, how do these cards, these images, like, right, this thing that I see on this card here, how does that relate to me and my life on a personal level? And one of the things this book does really, really well is to actually connect that to the author's life, so that you can kind of see how one might be able to make that connection. The writing is quite entertaining as well. It's a very enjoyable read. I have read this book cover to cover because, again, I bought the deck because I just wanted to read the book. I had no intention of using the cards. So anyway, we get into, Rachel True kind of talking about her introduction to the tarot and things of that nature. She does make mention of, The Craft, the movie that she's most well known for, which is wonderful. Then we have this wonderful getting started section. Now, again, if you are new to tarot, or if you are like, have been doing it for a long time like I have, and just really enjoy reading kind of those refresher basics kind of things, this is a wonderful book for that. But again, she kind of goes into a little bit less esoteric and more into the mundane, which I really appreciate. And I think if you're somebody who's just getting into tarot, all the esoteric layering that happens with a lot of the more modern tarot decks, and modern meaning as in, since like the Rider-Waite-Smith Thoth came into being, from that point moving forward, a lot of tarot decks are very heavily layered with esoteric meaning and symbology and all that. And while that's absolutely wonderful, it can be super overwhelming for somebody who's new to tarot. And this does a really wonderful job of kind of stripping that down. Like, it's still there. There's still hints of it there, but it's not the main focus of this particular deck. So I think that this is quite wonderful for an introductory book. So we have a little bit about, kind of just working with the tarot in terms of your intuition. Obviously, this is, the True Heart Intuitive Tarot. So intuitive reading is definitely kind of the basis of this foundation for this deck. She talks a little bit about the, the unknown or often confusing history of tarot, choosing a deck. I love this care and feeding of your deck. I love the idea of, because I do personify my decks, I kind of enjoyed reading that, let's feed our deck, let's take care of it. I thought that was quite cute. She talked about setting up an altar, keeping a notebook, which I am a huge proponent of. Then she talks about using your tarot cards with the actor's way, which honestly, the actor's way is basically path working, where you're kind of stepping into the card and you're looking at the card and how does it make you feel if you become the character, if you inhabit the characters, if you interact with the characters on the card, what is that experience to you? She calls it the actor's way, but it's more commonly known as something more akin to path working, which is quite wonderful. And so I do find that that's a really great way to get to know your cards. Then we have digging into your deck, where she talks about tarot by the number. Thank you, Rachel True, for acknowledging the fundamental structure and foundation of numerological association that is found in the tarot. In my opinion, if numbers weren't important, the cards wouldn't be numbered. So many decks these days in guidebooks just kind of gloss over the whole number thing, and I really, really love that this is included, which is, again, I think if you are somebody new to tarot, this is one of those like beginner's decks I personally would recommend, because she does actually give weight to the numbers, at least in this introductory. Some of the things that I found, like actually in her descriptions, are a little bit contradictory to her numerical associations, but that can happen. So then we have the 4 suits, and she talks about the suits in relation to their elemental associations as well. Again, it's right in line with how I read, so I was excited to see that. Then she talks about them being related to, swords is the air, mind, intellect. The discs is our earth, outer life and possessions. Wands is fire, energy, desire, that kind of thing. She does have a little bit of putting the suit energy and the numerical value together, which is absolutely fantastic, because that is the core principle by how I read. Then she goes into talking about the court cards, which she does actually associate as people. That isn't exactly how I work with the court cards, but again, if you're just learning tarot, that's a wonderful way to associate with the court cards. Then she has a little bit about reading reversal or the low vibe cards. Now she does talk about how you don't necessarily have to read the card upside down in order for it to be a reversal. If it shows up in a spread position as a more negative or shadow aspect, then you can read it in the low vibe interpretation, which is generally how I do, because I don't work with reversals. So I think that's really wonderful, but you can use the low vibe interpretation for your reversals if you want to. She talks about shuffling, pulling clarifier cards, and reading for other people. Then she has some tarot spreads in here. We have, your typical 3 card, the Celtic Cross. This is the Mother Piece spread, apparently. And she really breaks that down, so that's quite interesting. There's a relationship spread and the 5-card insight spread. This, along with me and a few other people that I know, this is the spread that we like to use from the book. It's just a wonderful kind of snapshot of what's going on. I probably said snapshot because I read it right there, but it's a wonderful just kind of like, as she says, quick and easy way to gain insight into any given situation. So I've actually used this spread with other decks too, so it's quite wonderful. And she gives an example of that reading, which can be quite helpful. And then she has kind of some final thoughts on interpreting and laying spreads. Then we go into the card associations. So we have, your basic setup. The thing I love is that again, we have the high vibe and low vibe, which could be upright and reversed, or light and shadow, which is how I look at them. And the write-ups on these cards are really wonderful. They're quite entertaining. She has quite a bit of information for the minor or for the majors. So we have a little bit about, the card and its essence. Then she has, it's if pulled in a low vibe, and then she has her own personal connection to the card, which this I think is really the treasure of this book. Not only is it really enjoyable reading, but it also, again, like I said, if you're fairly new to tarot, can really help you to understand how you could take the energy of a card and apply it in a personal way, because Rachel True shows you how she does that in this book. So it's really, really quite wonderful. We don't get as much for the minor arcana, which is, you know, pretty typical. But again, we have the thumbnail, the high vibe, the low vibe, kind of about the card, and then kind of our sort of divinatory, or if you pull it in particular situations, which can be really helpful. She kind of has it broken down into kind of like a basic meaning, what it is if you draw in a relationship reading, or in relation to a relationship question, or professional reading, and in relationship to that kind of work, as well as the low vibe. So I think she kind of has this deck a little bit, the idea of it being geared kind of toward either relationships or professional readings. Again, it's a basic, I shouldn't say basic, it's a standard kind of Waite Smith inspired tarot deck, and I feel like you could use it for any particular thing. But we get that for each of the cards. Again, sometimes the keywords that she associates with the cards don't quite align with the numerological associations that she connects to each card at the beginning of the book, but you know, she's probably trying to tie that also into those more traditional meanings. So yeah, really wonderful book. It was enjoyable to actually sit and read this book. So that's not, you know, sometimes I like to read tarot guidebooks like as not only a refresher for myself, but also because oftentimes when I read a tarot guidebook, I get a different way to look at the cards, right? It doesn't change my foundational understanding of a card, but it does add another layer or give me something else to think about, or another perspective that I could consider when working with a particular card. So this guidebook, I think, it was an entertaining read. Even if you are a seasoned tarot reader, I think you will enjoy reading Rachel Strue's little stories along with the major arcana. Again, she doesn't do that for the minors, but it's really wonderful to see how she connects the major arcana to different aspects of her life. But as a tarot guidebook, I think this is a fantastic one. And I think that even if the artwork doesn't necessarily appeal to you at this deck, there is a lot of value to be gained from this book, particularly if you are a beginner. So I really wanted to point that out because this book is the whole reason I bought the deck in the first place. Like I said, I had zero intention of actually working with the cards. I was just, you know, gonna put them away in storage and just keep the book and read it and keep it on my shelf as, you know, a reference material like I do with a lot of my guidebooks, like my Barbara Moore books or my Rachel Pollack books or, you know, things along those lines. Whether it's a guidebook or a how to read tarot book, they kind of function in the same way for me in that sense. So I definitely wanted to point out the value of this particular guidebook. And I'm definitely not the only one to say that. You can do some research if you want to find out more about this deck. Watch some more walkthroughs, see some more thoughts and interpretations on the guidebook and the cards and the structure of the deck, and I think that you'll see that for a lot of people, this is where it's at. It's in this book. So now that we've talked a little bit about the book, let's actually take a look at the cards. So here's the backs, and I do want to note that my deck has been modified. So not only have I edged it in this yellow color, I've actually trimmed the small white borders off. Now, the white borders were fine. It wasn't like they were impeding the use of the deck or the artwork in any sort of way. I just thought it would look nicer without it, and I was already in the process of trimming another deck, so I just went ahead and threw this one through the guillotine as well. And I do think it actually looks a lot nicer without that extra white border. The cardstock, I have heard people say in videos, I want to say when this deck first came out, that the cardstock was super flimsy and like it wasn't good. This is like cardboardy. It's like US Games cardstock, which is not my favorite, and I don't particularly like working with this kind of a cardstock. It is kind of a chunky deck, and you know, when we compare it to something like a Llewellyn or a Lo Scarabeo, like it's a lot less forgiving. It doesn't quite shuffle and bounce back quite as well as some of those decks do, but it's not flimsy by any stretch of the imagination. So I don't know if I just imagined hearing that at one point, or they have changed the cardstock in the newer editions, which is totally possible. So anyway, this deck isn't in any particular order, so I'm just going to kind of flip through the cards as we kind of talk about working with this deck. I again, had zero intention of working with this particular deck. I'm not like a huge fan of the way the court cards are illustrated. However, in a larger spread, it does really help them stand out. And if you are someone who reads with the court cards being kind of that key factor when they show up, kind of like a major, whereas a major arcana can hold a lot of weight and energy in a reading. For some people, the court cards really signify them and people around them, so they become really key points of the reading. It does make it, because they are all illustrated in this same style where they're kind of coming through this doorway or this portal, whereas you can see in the rest of the cards it's like fully illustrated edge to edge. This does help them stand out a lot in the reading, and you become very aware of what direction they're facing. So if you do read in more of that sort of open style, or directionality is important in your readings, this can actually be really, really helpful. The deck is very young, in my opinion. It's definitely like has that full maiden energy to it. The illustrations are all feature very young people. However, it's very diverse. I love the some of the people are like this stark black and white. I wish the whole deck was like that, but that's just my personal preference. But again, you can see like it's Rider-Waite-Smith influenced, but doesn't fully align to it. So it's not like a clone. It takes that and it does its own thing with it, which I really appreciate. The cards are very charmingly illustrated. It's a very kind of simple art style, but very, very clear, very easy to read. I love this Ten of Wands. There are some cards in this deck that I'm like, I get what you're getting at there, and I really, really like it. You know, as with most decks, there are some cards that just aren't my favorite, but that's okay. See, I love this with the really stark contrast between the kind of monochromatic people and then the beautifully colored and illustrated background. I think there's just something really stunning and powerful about that. For me, it's less about the people and more about what's going on in the energy exchange within the card, which I think is really, really cool. You know, this Seven of Swords is very in that thiefy Rider-Waite-Smith energy, but I love this sun with the pyramids. It's just beautiful. Very traditional high priestess. Again, see, we have this Two of Swords with the monochromatic person, and really what's the focus is the kind of two aspects here, the day and night, giving that idea of decision or duality, which I think is really wonderful. Again, here's a court card, so you can see they all have the their suit element background and then the kind of portal looking thing. So it's a really beautiful deck. I absolutely love this Fool card, and one of the things that I love about it is that her dress is see-through. So it's like she is a part of the world in a literal sense, as well as getting ready to step out into the world, which I think is really wonderful. So here's our Queen of Swords. Again, you can see some really traditional imagery in this deck, and then some imagery that totally does its own thing. Like this puts it very much in the realm of the mind, which is quite wonderful. But again, you can see here with this Four of Wands, again, very leaning into that traditional sense. The Lovers is quite interesting because we have this sort of alchemical thing going on in the card. Again, kind of traditional Devil. As usual, this card's a bit of a disappointment for me because it's a heart with three swords, although, you know, the swords are kind of all bound up, so that can be interesting. And there's an eye in the center, so, you know, that can kind of open it up to some interpretations. But that's one of the cards where, like, the book and the card kind of differ. Let's just take a look because I just want to kind of point that out as something to be aware of. Okay, so for the threes, she has growth, movement, groups, creation, triangles, abundance, change, creative expression, integration, expansion, and jealousy. So no heartbreak in there, right? And then we're gonna go to the Three of Swords where she has release, closure, new love, moving on, renewal, recovery, healing. But then here she talks about disappointments and things like that. That it may be bringing your vibe down, like it's a heavy card, a period of sadness. So we're tying into that heartbreak motif that we often see in the Rider-Waite-Smith, but the keywords don't necessarily cue into that idea either. And the card, for me, the illustration definitely ties into that Rider-Waite-Smith heartbreak kind of vibe thing going on. You know, again, that's a very me thing, and just in particular to the way that I read tarot, but that's what I mean by sometimes the descriptions, the card and the keywords don't quite tie together as seamlessly as they do in other cards, but it's still kind of an interesting little deck. And I will have to say that I like the artwork and imagery more than I thought I would. Again, it does lean pretty young in a general sense. We have a little bit of maybe kind of older figures, but definitely not going into that sort of elder or crone energy, with the exception of the Hierophant, which is pretty typical. But like if you look at these kings, I mean, they're not very mature in that sense. The Six of Swords is super cool. We have this kind of, again, this monochromatic figure, and they are bound, but they're bound to these birds who are taking them out of this situation, which is quite cool. So anyway, yeah, I love this Eight of Swords too. See, it's the ones with the figures that it's not a fully illustrated person. That allows me to kind of attribute that idea to more of an energy than an actual person. So I just think that's pretty cool. But yeah, it's an interesting deck. I do, again, like I said, I do like the cards better than I thought I would. And that's really only something I'm pointing out because I had no intention of actually working with the deck, to be perfectly honest. Like, look at this Five of Swords with all the swords going into the eye. That's quite interesting. Again, really inhabiting that mental realm. This Three of Wands is kind of cool. Some of the cards are a little bit more pippish, which I don't have a problem with. I think that's pretty cool. I guess the Emperor does look like he's a little bit older too. This Eight of Discs is like my favorite card in this deck. There's just something so shamanic and ancestral about this card, which I really love. This Four of Swords is really cool too. So yeah, it's been an interesting one. Again, I got it just to read the guidebook. I sound like a broken record, but I have been actually working with this deck, and I started using it for my Sunday readings, for just those simple 3-card readings that I do on Facebook. And I've really been enjoying it for that. So then I was like, okay, I kind of like it for that. Let's try it with some other things. So I've been kind of just playing around with it. Again, it's that cardboardy cardstock. So and again, mine's trimmed. And taking the little bit of that border off did help make it a little bit smaller. But it's still like, it really doesn't shuffle. Like, there's no real give to this, and I definitely can't bridge it, so I kind of have to do this little number with it. As you can see, I can kind of riffle it. It's a hard riffle. It's not easy, and I can kind of overhand it, but again, it's kind of a thick deck. But it's not super shiny. It's not gloss, but it's definitely not matte. It definitely has a shine to it, as you can see there. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of the decks that I've been working with this deck with. A couple of the oracles that I've just been kind of having to play with. The one that I've been using the most is the Soul Coaching Oracle cards, and it's these ones right here by Denise Linn. This is an older deck, like quite a bit older deck that, here's the backs. It's very, very shiny. It's that old Hay House shiny cardstock. This is one of those decks that I bought on their, like one of their sales. So it was like 10 bucks or something, and I was buying something else, and then I saw this and I was like, oh, what the heck, I'll throw that one in there, because I do really like Denise Linn decks, and I really like her work. I have a couple of her books, and so I was like, I'll go ahead and get her a deck too. Anyway, these two decks actually, of the pairings that we're going to talk about today, this is my favorite. I think that these two decks work really well together. The art styles are really compatible, but more importantly, the energies and the messages are really cohesive in these decks. The Soul Coaching has a little guidebook as well, which is actually quite nice. It gives you a little bit more of the card meaning, and it has this your soul wants you to know section, and then an affirmation. So I do actually jump into the guidebook some with this deck if I feel like there's like more that I need to dive into with this particular message. But for the most part, like the keywords really do tune you into what's going on and what energy. So here we have breakthrough between the King of Discs and the Nine of Swords. We got to break through all that mental energy to really inhabit this King energy here. There are little I am statements at the bottom. I don't really pay attention to those, to be perfectly honest, but they're nice if you want them. Mostly what I'm looking at is that keyword at the top. And that kind of serves as the focal point for the reading, or sometimes I will lay them down as positions. This deck actually works really well for creating positions because you could have a breakthrough position, a light position, you know, and what to embrace, what to be playful about. So this deck actually works really, really well for creating positional readings. And maybe I'll show you that real quick before we move on to a different deck. But just a quick flip through these two. Here we have light between the Ace of Wands and Queen of Swords. It really works well as a focal point. Just silence, this is what we're keying into. And then how do we do that? Through strength and the Five of Wands. Works really beautiful for that. Here we have embracing between the Two of Wands and the Emperor. I think the illustrations on the soul coaching deck is really, really cute too. And something about the yellow really works well with the True Heart Intuitive Tarot. It just, because there's a lot of yellow, I think, in the True Heart Intuitive deck. And sometimes this, you know, big, bright, bold colors like this can be hard to pair with other decks. Because you know, it's a very focal point color, but it really, there's yellow in all of these cards. So the other thing that you can do with this particular configuration is look where the yellow is leading you throughout the cards. So here we have the yellow pentacles and the yellow flowers into the yellow card. And then you can even pull in the colors, because you know how I like to do the color thing. You can pull the colors in from the center as well. So we have yellow pulling through and then into the cups. And then we also have this blue color, blue-green color, which I'm getting in the sky and the water. So again, that's another interesting thing that you can do with these two decks together. Here we have fulfillment. Again, where is that yellow? Where is it drawing your eye? What cohesive things can you find? You know, there's a flower on this card and there's flowers on this card. So there's that tie-in there as well, which can be quite wonderful. Here we have beginnings, the Star and Judgment. It's quite beautiful. Joy. Believe. So you can see that, like, yeah, they do work really well together. This is one of those pairings that the deck works really well as a focal point, but aesthetically they actually work really well together. And again, I love pulling the energy of the color across the cards to see what thread is tying that color together. So yellow pentacles, you know, yellow here in the background, but also kind of in that sun energy, and then yellow here, lots of yellow in the kind of pillars and the lights coming out. So that's quite interesting. Okay, so before we move on to another little pairing, I just want to do real quick, I just want to show you real quick how I've been using this also as a position. So if I'm doing a reading and I just need to know, like, what wisdom am I seeking, what am I awakening to, and what delight will that bring, you can pull all of that into the energy of working with this reading. But then I can also take my tarot and layer it over the top. So what wisdom will I find? It's in the Hermit. That's where the wisdom area lies. What am I awakening to? The Empress. You can kind of just even layer them like this, which is quite wonderful. And then where will I find delight? In the Wheel of Fortune, I pulled all major, so kind of interesting. But a deck like this works really, really well for positional readings like that as well. Kind of using it to create positions within your reading, and it also creates kind of an energy beneath the tarot card, which is quite wonderful. So real quick, another mass market deck that I've been enjoying tying this deck together with is the Hedgewitch Botanical. The Hedgewitch Botanical, because it's a Hedgewitch deck, definitely has a little bit more of a magic kind of energy. So the True Heart Intuitive for me really inhabits the mundane space, which is really wonderful. Again, like I talked about, it's not super esoteric, so it really falls into that mundane kind of everyday life category, which I think is quite wonderful. And the Hedgewitch Botanical brings a little bit of the magical energy to it, which is quite lovely. Again, we have just the simple image with the keyword. The guidebook for this deck is lovely as well, so if that's something that you want to tie into, you certainly can. But it kind of provides this wonderful kind of magic, sometimes self-care, sometimes kind of just tapping into your own inner magic and manifesting that outward, which works really beautiful. So here we have nourished between the Ace of Discs and the Eight of Swords. The art styles are different because, you know, we have this kind of I don't know what this is called, this art style is. This is like watercolors. But I think the fact that it's very simple illustrations in the Hedgewitch Botanical and just kind of black and white with those pops of color. Again, you can pull the color throughout. You know, there's purple in this. Where might I find purple in these cards, and what message might there be in that energy? What's tying those together? That's quite lovely. Again, the keywords are really fantastic. The Hedgewitch Botanical is one of my favorite decks. I use it for like absolutely everything because, as you can see, it goes with just about everything, which is quite lovely. But again, it's just another really wonderful, really affordable and available mass market oracle deck that I find just works really well with this particular deck. Again, here we have that yellow, I mean, very much in that yellow realm. So I can really look at what yellow things are my eyes being drawn to. I definitely do a lot of color work with the Hedgewitch Botanical, and I think that's because it is primarily a black and white deck with just those pops of color. So the colors are real apparent. So it really can help me pull that energy across cards to create a kind of cohesive line or energy thread across them. So yeah, this is another one that I think just works really well together. The Hedgewitch Botanical doesn't bring a lot of excess into a reading. It's very streamlined, it's very minimal, it's very focused. And so it works really well for kind of creating a really succinct focal point and tying into the tarot, you know, with that, as in what's going on within the context of this focal point. So it's one of my favorites to use. I think it works really well for this. So now I just want to do one indie oracle, and this is the Roots and Wings oracle. This is again another deck similar to the Hedgewitch Botanical that has a really focused energy, but it's a little bit more illustrated. So you get a little bit more pictorial energy going on, a little bit more of almost a story-like flow that we get across these cards. So here we have passage between the Princess of Swords and the Lovers. Again, totally different art styles, but I think that the energy of them really works, especially because there's a lot of kind of almost shamanic energy to the Roots and Wings, and then we kind of get a little hints of that here and there within the True Heart Intuitive as well. Again, for me, it leans more into that than, say, the esoteric. So I feel like the Roots and Wings works really well with it. Again, looking at color, looking at things like the plant energy that I might find across these three cards is really quite wonderful. Here we have seasons. This one, you know, I might be looking at the swirl of color. Where might I find that swirl energy, and what might that tell me? How that might draw my eye. And the other thing I love about the Roots and Wings is sometimes we get, there's a couple of cards, I think most of the Major Arcana is also represented in this deck. And so sometimes you get some of that Major Arcana energy as well, which is quite interesting. It's really interesting when it shows up in conjunction with a Major Arcana card from the deck. So like if I was to pull the Magician from this deck and the Magician, so we have double Magician energy, that's quite interesting. The Roots and Wings adds a little bit of an even more softer energy to the True Heart Intuitive, which is quite wonderful, especially like if you're feeling a little bit like a little bit tender. This can be a really wonderful pairing to kind of ease you into your message, and sometimes we need that. This is interesting, the voice between the Three of Wands and the Four of Swords. We'll do one more. We have Transformation with the Seven of Discs and the King of Wands. So again, the True Heart Intuitive Tarot is a deck that I've actually had quite a lot of fun kind of playing with and getting to know. The art style isn't always my thing, but I do find that it's a really solid reader. It definitely tends to have a little bit more of a gentle energy to it. As I mentioned, there are some interesting things going on with the court cards, which can sometimes be a really big indication as to where energy is moving or how it's moving or who it's moving for or toward or against within a reading. And I do find that like it reads really well. Still my favorite card. And it does some really interesting things with the depiction of the tarot, which I quite enjoy. Again, the guidebook is really where it's at for me, but I didn't want to actually discount the imagery in the deck itself, and it is a really consistent, solid reader. It doesn't really sway too far one way or the other. I find it to be a pretty balanced reader overall, although I think it definitely kind of tends to lean more into the less confronting imagery. We don't really have anything really bloody or gruesome or anything like that. It's a very, very kind of understated deck in that sense. I mean, even with this Ten of Swords, which I like. It's like this almost stone kind of figure, almost maybe a Medusa-like figure, and the swords are in the back, but we don't see any blood. This isn't like a real person, and so I do appreciate that. But it's kind of an understated deck, and while it does, I think, have overall pretty young imagery in terms of the people, it's pretty diverse in terms of cultural depictions. We don't have a lot of diversity in the body type, but you know, it's something. So it's definitely a deck that I've been enjoying working with. It's like an unassuming deck, and I mean that in the best possible way, as in it doesn't bring a bunch of heavy stuff to the table. It's a very clean, very clear reader. It doesn't try to layer on too much on top of the kind of just base traditional meaning of the tarot. And sometimes that can be like a really nice kind of palette cleanser. It's worked really well for my simple Sunday spreads, because those spreads are designed to be kind of that, you know, let's kind of get back to basics. Let's just do some simple 3-card readings. And this deck really, for me, is kind of about getting back to the basics, particularly because the creator does take a more, in a general sense, more numerological and elemental association to the cards, which is how the basis of my reading style. So I appreciate that. But it's been a really wonderful reader, and I've definitely enjoyed working with it. I mean, it's definitely not the most favorite deck in my collection, right? The art style is not really my thing, but it's a great kind of no-nonsense, kind of everyday type of a reader. It's definitely something that I think works really well for just kind of mundane everyday things. I don't think that this would be a deck that I would go to for like real deep personal exploration or shadow work, or, you know, trying to suss out my personal growth path or anything like that, but just kind of on an everyday, or just a, what do I need to know today, or what energies might I be needing to tap into, or I have a question about this totally mundane situation and I maybe need some advice. I think that's where this deck actually shines in terms of its artwork. I've really kind of enjoyed using it for those just real simple readings. That's a lot of what I've been doing with it. You know, also, you know, kind of pairing it with the Roots and Wings Oracle, kind of getting into a little bit more of that shamanic vibe. Then I had the Hedgewitch Botanical, which I use for kind of just that, really that palette cleansing type of a reading when I just really wanted to get really, really clear and focused. And then mostly the soul coaching cards, because these ones have really just been kind of the most, I think, cohesive and in alignment with the energy of the True Heart Intuitive Tarot. So that's just kind of my experience of working with the deck. Again, for me, it really started out as being all about this book here, and that's what I wanted, and I read it, and it's definitely going to be staying in my collection. I have even though I don't really foresee myself using the deck a ton, because to be perfectly honest, I do have other decks that I resonate with the artwork more, that I use for kind of mundane readings. This book is definitely a treasure, and it's not going anywhere. It's going to stay on my shelf. And like I said, if you are new to tarot, I would highly recommend this deck as like a beginner deck with an excellent guidebook that I think will really help you kind of create that personal connection to the cards and understand how a person can take something with such a big idea behind it and translate that in a very personal way. And I think that really, this book shines for that. So that has been my experience working with the True Heart Intuitive Tarot and some of the decks that I have been playing with it. I would love to know if you have this deck and what your thoughts are on it, so please feel free to share with me in the comments below. As always, my friends, thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to sharing with you again soon.